How could God allow evil? Well, what if evil doesn't even exist? What if evil is just an illusion? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher's Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. I liked Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 5. I haven't seen Season 6 or 7 yet. 7's not out yet, and 6 is not on Netflix yet. So every night, I remember my wife and I watched like one show per night, and every night I'd go to bed and I'd be so angry. I hated Cassius and I hated General Hale and her smug daughter. And the weird thing is, I remember going to bed a couple of times and just thinking like, how could these kinds of things happen? Especially a couple of times when you find out that the earth is destroyed or you see, weird stuff like that happening. But of course, the thing about that is this isn't real. This didn't actually happen. So there is no question of how can these kinds of things happen. And yet the show was good enough that it put me in that mindset that I was actually considering those questions as if they actually had happened. Well, what if all evil in this world is just like that? What if it all doesn't actually happen? Would there still be a problem of evil? Now, we're considering the problem of evil from a Hindu perspective, but we're going to consider a very specific kind of Hindu perspective. Hinduism is massive, and it's in no way monolithic. The name Hindu actually comes from Indus Valley. It's just a term that Western colonizers came up with because they wanted to refer to the kind of religion that was being practiced in that area. And surprisingly, the people that were called by that, the name kind of stuck. They kind of liked that name. There's very little that Hindus actually agree upon. And this isn't a criticism, by the way. This is, for non-Hindus, I'm hoping to explain to you what the religion is like. Basically, you have to revere the Vedas. But as to which god did what, how do we achieve moksha, are the gods even real in the first place? You can disagree on those major things and still be Hindu. So what version of Hinduism are we interested in today? Well, we began the philosophy of evil section talking about the question, why is there evil? And that is a question for everybody. So any form of Hinduism would be interested in answering that question. But right now, we're looking at a very specific question in the philosophy of evil, which is the problem of evil. How could God allow evil? This is really an objection to the existence of God. And it goes like this. If God exists, he could prevent evil because he's all-powerful and all-knowing. If God exists, he would prevent evil because he's all-good. So, if God exists, then evil doesn't exist. However, evil does exist, therefore God doesn't exist. Now, this argument assumes specific things about God, each of which could be challenged. First, it assumes that God is all-powerful. And for an example of how you might challenge that, please see my video on the LDS response to the problem of evil. Second, it assumes that God is all-knowing. For an example of a challenge to that, please see my video on open theism and the problem of evil. And finally, it assumes that God is all good, and challenges to that we will explore in future videos. But there's an important corollary to this. One of the reasons we say God could prevent evil is because he's all-powerful. And by all-powerful, we mean unlimited amount of power, infinite power. Maybe a God with a limited amount of power could prevent all evil, but there was no way for us to know that. So we're considering a God that would have an infinite amount of power. But you couldn't have two of those. Why? What would happen if they disagree? What would happen if they got into a fight? Saying that you have an infinite amount of power basically means that you could stop anything else and you couldn't be stopped. But if you had two beings like that couldn't be stopped by anything else, then how could they stop all other things? In other words, it would lead to a contradiction. These beings both could and could not be stopped. Another way to look at it is this. Conceptually, at least, saying that one God has an unlimited amount of power, an infinite amount of power, automatically limits the amount of power that other gods could have. And by the way, if you're interested in problems of infinity like this, please see my playlist on the philosophy of infinity. So the idea here is that there can only be one omnipotent God, only one all-powerful God. And this would be kind of like a God over all the other gods. What does this mean for Hinduism and the problem of evil? Well, the pantheon of gods, and most notably the Trimurti, aren't the kinds of gods that we're interested in. In Hinduism, the Trimurti is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the creator, sustainer, and destroyer gods. And none of them seem to have an infinite amount of power because none of them have all power over the other two. Typically, when there's some kind of exchange between the three where they disagree, Shiva seems to be the most powerful, but he's not overwhelmingly powerful. It's not like that he just has infinite amount of power over those two gods. So if this assumption from the problem of evil of all-powerfulness is to apply in Hinduism, it can't be to one of these three gods. Luckily, we do have a good candidate for an all-powerful god in Hinduism, Brahman, not Brahma, but Brahman. It's really confusing, but Brahma is the creator god. not all-powerful. Brahman, on the other hand, a lot of Hindus believe that all other gods are just manifestations or avatars or incarnations of this one, all-encompassing God, Brahman. So Brahman would have that limitlessness that we're looking for here. So let's consider that kind of a Hinduism. How would Brahman avoid the problem of evil? What would be the solution for Brahman for the problem of evil? Let's look back at those assumptions. Can we reject any of these assumptions to save Brahman from the problem of evil? Well, let's not reject the all-powerful one. We just established that one. We could reject the all-knowing assumption. And in fact, there are a lot of scriptures that portray Brahman not as a personal god, but more as like an all-pervading force, a world soul. And if that's true, then Brahman is not all-knowing because he doesn't know anything. Of course, that would take us out of the realm of problem of evil. It would no longer make sense to ask the question, why would Brahman allow evil? That would be like asking, why does gravity allow people to fall even though they're going to hurt themselves? We would be back to that original question of why does evil exist in the first place, and not why would Brahman allow evil to exist. We will explore this version of Hinduism in future videos on the philosophy of evil, but for right now, we're looking at the problem of evil, so we won't consider this version. And there are other scriptures that portray Brahman as a personal god. For this video, let's consider the form of Hinduism that takes those scriptures literally. And if Brahman is personal, if Brahman is a person, then it makes sense to say that he's all-knowing, for reasons I won't really get into here. What about that all-good assumption? There are a number of Hindus that believe God is beyond morality. He's amoral, not immoral. Now, we'll explore that idea very soon. But there are many other forms of Hinduism where people appeal to Brahman as if he were good. So let's consider Brahman as all good. What is there left to respond to the problem of evil? Well, interestingly, all forms of Hinduism assume that we are stuck in some kind of cycle of reincarnation, of samsara. We die, we come back as another person or maybe a different kind of creature. We die again, we come back again, and we're just stuck in this cycle. And that's a bad thing. In Orange County, where I live in California, the idea of reincarnation is actually very comforting for a lot of people. Why? Because it's all puppy dogs and ice cream here. And people think, oh man, I'm nearing death. I really wish I could just stay here. Oh, coming back? That sounds awesome. I want to do that. But not everybody thinks of it that way. So for example, Tupac. My only fear of death is coming back reincarnated. Why did Tupac not want to come back reincarnated? Because life for him was filled with a lot of suffering. And that's the idea in Hinduism, is that there's just so much suffering in the world. You wouldn't want to keep coming back over and over again. You want to break free from this cycle of reincarnation. You want to achieve moksha, liberation from the cycle. Liberated to what? Well, a lot of forms of Hinduism believe that there's some true self to us, some Atman. And we achieve moksha when we finally realize that our Atman is really just Brahman. We are really just a part of that God. And when we do that, we reunite with Brahman, like a drop of water going back into the ocean. And in this way, Brahman is sort of like the world soul. Everything is just an aspect of Brahman. But it doesn't seem like that, right? It doesn't seem like I'm part of some other thing. Well, the fact that we seem separate from Brahman is Maya. It's just illusion. And really, this is the essence of evil. We take this illusion to be real. In fact, it's almost inextricably stuck in our head that we are this separate being. Evil, then, is Maya. It is illusion. But that gives us the perfect response to the problem of evil. We just reject premise 4 and then it's not the case that evil exists. So the problem of evil really isn't a problem at all. Now, there are some objections that you could give to this response. So for example, I had a good friend, JJ McConnell, and he was in pilot training with me. He was an awesome guy. He helped me to really get through. I remember him telling me, dude, if a knucklehead like me can get through, Chico, you can get through too. And that was very inspiring. I saw him and I was like, yeah, he's succeeding and he's just like me. I can do it too. It was very inspiring. I love the guy, and he got the jet that he wanted to. He was in the middle of training, and one day he was water skiing and he got hit by a boat and he died. It was very tragic. He was such a great guy. And I might get upset with this response. I might say, the boat was an illusion. It sure seems like it had real consequences. But then a response like that really doesn't understand the pervasiveness of this illusion. So it reminds me of a famous story where a Hindu philosopher and an Indian king were sort of arguing about this, and the Hindu philosopher kept saying, no, it is all illusion. This whole thing is an illusion. And the king kept like trying to bring forth all these proofs that this is not an illusion, that this world is real. And finally he said, okay, I got it. Meet me in the backyard. I'll be right there. I don't know if kings have yards or what. But the philosopher goes out to where he says the king releases an elephant on the guy, and the guy runs up a tree because he doesn't want to get stampeded by this elephant. The king goes, aha, I got you. You don't believe this is an illusion because you ran away from the elephant. And the philosopher says, you only think you saw me running away from the elephant. It was an illusion. Super frustrating, right? Hopefully you see his point is that the illusion is so pervasive. It's not just that the boat was an illusion. It's that JJ's life was an illusion. His death was an illusion. The whole thing is an illusion. So you don't get to just pick and choose which parts are illusions and which parts are real. A second objection you might have, we could call the that sucks objection. You know, you may not like this idea. It sounds really not fun to be going back as a drop of water back into the ocean. You know, you may think, I want to stay me. I don't want to become part of Brahman. First, that's not really the way moksha is. Apparently, you're supposed to retain your identity in some way. You realize that you're part of Brahman, but you still are yourself. I don't know exactly what this is supposed to be like, and it's not like for these ideas we could know exactly what they're like. I guess it's a crude example, but the best example I could give would be like, imagine my finger all of a sudden gained consciousness and, you know, hello everybody, and it's still a part of me, right? But it still understood where it was. I could maybe have full control over the finger, but maybe it could do stuff of its own will if it wanted to. I don't know if I allowed it to. It is hard for me to make sense of this doctrine. I don't understand what it would be like to have two centers of consciousness and one of them is just a part of the other. And although it sounds great to be, you know, with God and everything, I wouldn't want to find out that I am God. That seems like a whole lot of stress that I don't want. But a second response that could be given here is that that's not really an objection in the first place. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, I don't like taxes, but they sure are real. So I don't think those two objections are going to hold much weight. A third objection, however, I think might be a little more powerful, and it's this. The physical might be an illusion, but the experience can't be. The worst pain I've ever felt was in college. I remember I had the flu and I had a fever, and I had never really taken medicine by myself before. You know, mom and dad always just given me my medicine. So I called home one day and I was like, you know, what do? I just feel terrible. I got this fever. My dad told me, have you taken aspirin? And I said, no, what does that do? He said, well, it's a fever reducer. So I looked on the bottle and it said, take 2 tablets, and I didn't read any further, right? So I took 2 tablets. Sure enough, fever went down. I'm feeling better. That night we had a special dinner going on, so I really wanted to be good for that dinner. So I took 2 more, hoping that the fever would go down more. Within the space of maybe like 4 hours, I took 8 aspirin. I ended up just all messed up and my colon twisted, and it was the most excruciating pain. I remember feeling the pain, and all of a sudden I can't remember periods of that time because it was so painful. Like I just didn't know what was going on. At the time I was an atheist, and I remember praying to God to kill me because I was in so much pain. So that tells you how much pain it was. But what if this is all an illusion? What if this body isn't really real? It's not really there. What if the colon isn't real? I still felt real pain, right? It wouldn't make sense to say, well, you're not really in pain. You're just feeling like you're in pain. Yeah, that's the point, right? I feel the pain. Even if there isn't something physical associated with this pain, there still really is that experience of pain. So even if these things are illusory, they still exist as illusions, and therefore they still have that suffering quality to them. And if that's what is evil, then it seems like evil still exists, even if everything else is an illusion. And that brings us to a fourth objection. This is sort of a confusion of language here. It's not that evil itself is an illusion, it's that everything being separate from Brahman is an illusion. And the evil that we experience stems from this illusion. In other words, it's not the evil that's an illusion, it's the separateness that's an illusion. And that causes suffering, and that suffering is evil. So evil would still be real. So it seems like we're still left asking this question, why would Brahman allow evil? Which is totally fine. He could absolutely have answers. It doesn't disprove this form of Hinduism, but what it does do is show that if we're going to use the doctrine of Maya to respond to the problem of evil, it's just not an adequate response to the problem of evil. We still would have to figure out some purpose that Brahman would have for allowing evil in the first place. There is an interesting further question. Does the doctrine of Maya actually make the problem of evil worse? Here's what I mean. Let's say that it's just suffering that is evil in the world. And we just said that suffering is still real even if the rest of the world is an illusion. Well, now we still have all that real suffering plus we are being deluded. This whole world is an illusion, so we are being deceived. Why does Brahman allow us to be deceived? In other words, it seems like we have all the same evils that any believer in God would have to contend with, but a person that believes in Hinduism, that believes in this specific form of Brahman, would also have to throw on top of that the problem of Maya. And this is reminiscent of a debate between two philosophers, Rene Descartes and George Berkeley. Descartes argued that if God exists, then we can be sure that this world is not an illusion. Why? Because God wouldn't deceive us. Berkeley, interestingly, argued opposite, saying that if we could get all this stuff, all this experience, which is the important stuff, without God having to create matter, then creating that matter would actually be extraneous. It would be wasteful. Why would God create that matter if all we really need is the experience? Therefore, if God exists, then this is an illusion. And this is actually reminiscent of a different argument. There's an argument against the existence of God from the vastness of the universe, which is that the universe is so vast that it doesn't make any sense to say that God created because you have all this extra stuff out there that's just sitting out there. There's no reason that an intelligent being would create that stuff if it's just going to sit out there. Now, of course, this objection assumes that God created this universe just for us, which is not a very good assumption, but also it assumes that God could waste. You know, if God is all powerful, like we are assuming here, then it's not like he's got some limited resources that he has to hoard away. You know, he can just do whatever he wants. He's making up his own resources. So why not create a super vast universe? You know, why not keep creating? And in the same way, I don't think Berkeley's argument works. He assumes first that the only important thing is the experience, but second, that if God went ahead and made matter, then he would be wasting. Well, if you're an infinite being, you know, have an unlimited amount of power, if you're creating from nothing, then there is no such thing as wasting. You can make all the matter you want. So I don't think Berkeley's argument works. And yet I think it's relevantly interesting in responding to Descartes. You know, if we can get all the stuff that's important to us, the experiences, without having the matter, then why is it that important? I would definitely have a problem if I knew that the people that I was talking to were just an illusion. But if we're both plugged into the illusion and somehow we can communicate with that, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's bad, but I can't really see why it's that bad. So does the doctrine of Maya make the problem of evil worse? Maybe a little bit, but I can't see it being that significant. Anyway, as I've said before, I'm not a Hindu, I'm actually a Christian. And I hope I've been as charitable and as understanding as possible in making this video, but I don't know everything there is to know. So please feel free to correct me on any of these things if you're Hindu or if you have a better knowledge of Hinduism. I'd really appreciate actually the extra information. And if you want to hear more about the problem of evil and just the philosophy of evil in general, please don't forget to subscribe and to click that little bell so that you'll get a warning every time a new video comes out. That's all I got for today. Adios.